Tonight on the Politics Hub, NHS name and shame, a new league table of hospital performance. Supposed to drive up standards, but some trusts say it will demoralise staff. Inevitable job losses and higher prices. The verdict from retailers on Chancellor Rachel Reeves's budget. A peaceful transition of power. President Biden sits down with Donald Trump to secure a smooth transfer to the president-elect. And celebrating cat people. I promise there is a political element to the story. We are bringing you the contest over who is Parliament's top cat. All that and more with Tom Baldwin and Daisy McAndrew, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, if there's one thing this Labour government will be judged on, it will be the NHS. They promised to speak hard truths about the health service, a service that, in their words, is not on its knees, but on its face. And they've also said that there will be no more extra money without reform. The problem is, it does look like that's exactly what happened in the budget. More money for the NHS, paid for by record levels of taxation, without spelling out exactly what that reform was going to be. Well, today we did get some more detail on reform, league tables for hospitals, which the public can view, and if trusts continue to bump along the bottom of those tables, well, the bosses could be fired. They were tried before in 2005, and while there is data that public league tables can make a difference to the quality of care, there are also concerns that they can distort the system as trusts prioritise the areas that they're publicly measured on. We'll be digging into all of that on the programme tonight. I think it is fair to say, though, that if the government is going to turn around a health service that it describes as broken, well, this has just got to be the beginning of the necessary reform, if that really is going to happen. Laura Badenoch has tonight's first report.
This is his set-piece moment on a stage presenting his plan for NHS reform to some of its senior leaders.
Improving services for patients should be rewarded, and the quid pro quo is that there will be no more rewards for failure. The work you do couldn't be more serious. When you get it right, lives are saved. When you don't, the consequences can be tragic. If performance dips, I reserve the right to take those freedoms away. And for those judged to be persistently failing, we will act.
His audience listened carefully. They need to. Their trusts will be pitted against each other in new league tables. And that's worrying some.
So I think what we have to recognise is that you really need to support improvement and support performance. And the question has to be asked, are league tables the way to do that? Or is it encouraging greater collaboration across systems?
So do you think a league table will do that?
I think it's going to be difficult.
And beyond the conference, there are other concerns.
Another profound problem with performance tables is that they can create a culture of target chasing, and that could lead to a cover-up of bad news, and that would be bad news for patient safety.
It's also what caused the scandal at Stafford Hospital. Staff under pressure to meet targets put lives at risk. Julie Bailey campaigned after her mother died from poor care.
As soon as I heard the announcement, I thought straight away, we could be on the next back to mid-staffs. The conditions we had that created mid-staffs, where we hide things and we think we've got good hospitals, but really we haven't.
Wes Streeting insists patients are at the heart of his reform. He knows where he's heading, but he'll need the support of NHS staff to guarantee success. Laura Badenoch, Sky News, Liverpool.
Just before coming on air, I spoke to the Health Minister, Karin Smyth. Great to have you on the programme. Thank you very much for being here. So just talk me through the announcement today. What are you trying to do?
So, as I think people will know, in the budget, the NHS settlement was larger share of the budget than other departments in a very difficult budget, and we said all along that that would come with reform. So today was about setting out the stages of what that reform might look like. It'll be followed up by some technical documents called the NHS mandate and oversight frameworks and things like that. But we've been very clear. We were very clear in our manifesto, we're very clear with the British public that the NHS, we want it to survive and thrive into the 21st century, but it has to change. And today was about setting out some of those steps.
The kind of headline announcement is league tables for hospitals, right? So kind of publicly available league tables, and if trusts are not measuring up, then the people involved could be sacked. I just feel sometimes like, you know, your kind of rhetoric around the NHS is up here. You know, you say it's not on its knees, it's on its face, it's broken. No reform, no change, no more money without reform. And yet at the same time, you know, what your big shiny reform is to introduce a league table system that was already tried in 2005. I mean, is this big enough? Is this ambitious enough?
Well, it's got a package of reforms. I know headlines are you know, sometimes
so
grab the attention.
What's the big reform?
One of the things
idea?
One of the things I'm really pleased to see as a former NHS manager myself is about leadership being properly developed and supported, both clinical leadership and non-clinical leadership, so that we give those local leaders the right support, the right skills to do a very, very difficult job. We know that some marvellous things happen in different parts of the NHS, some really high-skilled care, some really efficient care, but we know that that is not spread throughout the system, and that's why we say we want to take the best of the NHS to the rest of the NHS, but leaders need support to do that. So one of the things we're talking about today is that leadership college to give people that support. So that is about encouraging, it's about a better culture, it's about rewarding people to do what is a really difficult job. And the league tables idea is not about punishing people. If people aren't doing the right job for their local populations, then it's right that they're no longer there. I think most people would agree with that. But it is about transparency. It is about accountability. When we've been out in the election campaign, people want to support the NHS, but they're quite sceptical about whether it can survive.
Yeah.
They're quite sceptical about the extra money, actually. And I think it's really important that we're able to demonstrate value for taxpayers' money and accountability for good services.
But I guess this is kind of my point. You're talking there about, like, you know, the survival of the NHS. And you're right, a lot of people are worried about that from all sorts of political persuasions. You know, you're talking there about the need to reform. You can't just keep throwing money in. But the reforms seem, you know, with all respect, not that massive. You know, if you talk about league tables that have been tried before, but you're talking about, you know, more support for development and leadership in different parts of the NHS. I mean, this doesn't seem like the root and branch reform of the NHS that we were promised.
So the large-scale reform is the 10-year plan. So there are a number of things going on, and I don't expect everybody to be able to keep up with every detail of that. So when we set out the 10-year plan and when we set out the consultation exercise, which we did recently, and that's still available, if people want to give in their views, we really welcome them, staff, the public, patients, at change.nhs.uk. We're getting some fantastic responses on that. That all feeds into the 10-year plan, but we're not waiting for the 10-year plan in the spring. We have to make sure that the money that's going in this year and next year is immediately transformed into good outcomes for patients.
Yeah, I don't understand what the big idea is. You're right, you have got this big funding, you know, record levels of taxation.
Yeah.
What's the big idea?
So the big idea
isn't a 10-year plan.
The big idea is to shift care from hospital to community, into neighbourhood centres particularly, to move from an analogue service to the digital, because we're not using the best technology that we can, and from a sickness service to prevention. Those are what we call the 3 shifts. Those are the big ideas that we want to make happen. We know that's going to take up to 10 years to do. That's why it's a 10-year plan. And what's set out today is some of the tools, some of the indications and the messages to those people in the NHS about how we see reform working. We want to work with them to deliver this. So it's a package over a period of time.
I was keen to talk to you as well about the rise in employers' national insurance contributions, because there's been a lot of concern about how this might hit everything from GPs to pharmacies, but also hospices as well. And, you know, for many people, I mean, anyone who has seen a loved one die of a terminal illness like cancer, or people struggling with long-term terrible health conditions, will know the importance of hospices. You know, sometimes that is like the kind of glimmer of humanity in your darkest time. Surely you're going to do something to help hospices who say they're going to be hit by this, and some might even have to close.
Well, of course, you're absolutely right. They are a lifeline for so many people, and it's important that they are supported. And as the Health Secretary has said, that we are obviously looking at that. He hopes to be able to announce any further measures on that before Christmas. We know the budget's hard.
Can you just promise hospices
I
that they're
can't
going to be
promise
okay?
that now. I can't promise exactly what that will look like now. We know they're an important part of the landscape of care for people. We know that's true of GPs and primary care. We know this budget's really difficult. The population knows that. The Chancellor's had to make some really difficult choices to get the economy back on track and to make sure that we do have public services that do survive.
We're talking about end-of-life care.
We are.
Here, right?
It's really...
Why would you announce something in a budget and then say afterwards, after everyone's really, really worried about what it means, oh, OK, we're going to try and look at it? I mean, surely you'd have thought about this before.
Well, we have to look at things in the round. There are a lot of different impacts in different parts of the economy, public sector and the private sector from any measure that Chancellor takes. We all know that this is all very difficult and that the Chancellor's had to take some really difficult decisions. And I think the population know that as well. And we do need to look at the implications across a whole range of services of that budget, and that's what we will continue to do.
I want to talk to you a little bit about assisted dying. Wes Streeting has said he'll vote against, has some practical concerns about the fact it could cost the NHS money, and he's also, we understand, announced a review into the cost of assisted dying. Do you share the Health Secretary's concerns?
Well, just to be clear, there isn't a review into the cost. That's not what Wes Streeting said. It's absolutely normal for any legislation that's going through to be looked at by the department, whether the Ministry of Justice, Health Department, to make sure that the department is ready to do whatever Parliament decides. Wes Streeting and I are on different sides of this discussion at the moment, as many parliamentarians are. I'm a long-time supporter of choice at the end of life. I think it's fundamentally important for people. So parliamentarians have got very different views. The crucial thing is that Parliament will decide. It's a very finely balanced judgment for many people. People are still deciding. It is a difficult issue. We all understand that. And I think Kim Ledbetter is doing an excellent job in being respectful of people about that. But whatever Parliament decides, the government will abide by. That is how our democracy works. And I think we will see a good discussion, particularly if it gets through the second reading and really scrutiny line by line in committee, which is how our parliamentary process works, and get a chance to really get into the issues. But the government will do whatever Parliament decides.
The question was whether you share the Health Secretary's concerns about the cost of assisted dying to the NHS.
I don't agree with the Health Secretary on the issue of this vote on assisted dying. We're on different sides of that argument.
About the cost specifically, do you think that... Do you I'm just trying to work out your view on the cost of it, because he's made his view quite clear. So you obviously believe in assisted dying. Many people would agree with you on that. But do you have concerns over the cost of it?
No, I have concerns about people's choice at the end of life, and that they are treated in a safe and humane way, and that they have choice over the end of their life in the same way they expect the rest of their life. And the government have made clear, and government ministers make clear, that the government will do whatever Parliament decides. That's how our democracy works, and that's absolutely right and proper.
Well, let's talk now to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. I mean, pretty clear that Karin Smyth and Wes Streeting take opposing views on assisted dying. I was a bit confused by the review comment. Is there a review? Is there a review? Isn't there a review? What's going on?
So I'm going to take you through the very specific language people are using, because it's quite interesting, because I think things are getting a bit heated inside government on this subject. You just heard Karin Smyth tell you, to quote, "Just to be clear, there isn't a review into the costs of the implications of the assisted dying bill." Let me read you what Wes Streeting said earlier. "Now that we've seen the bill on assisted dying published, I asked my department to look at the costs that would be associated with providing the new service to enable assisted dying to go forward." Now, if you talk to people around Wes Streeting, they say he's doing an analysis. It's not a review, because a review sounds too formal, but, you know, we're doing an analysis. One person's review is another person's analysis, I'm afraid. I don't really understand that there is a particularly formal distinction, but what I think you saw was a nervousness that there are questions being asked within government about how this is going to work. A government that's meant to be neutral because this issue is a free vote. And just take a step back to explain to viewers what's been going on with Wes Streeting today. Wes Streeting is getting punchier and punchier on the subject of his opposition to assisted dying, because he was giving that big speech today about the financial pressures on the NHS, and he came out and he said that if Parliament does authorise assisted dying, it's going to cost money. There are resource implications for doing it, his exact words, and that choice would come at the expense of other choices. If Parliament chooses to go ahead with assisted dying, it is making a choice to prioritise this as an area for investment. Now, on one level, he's just stating hard fact. There is a set budget for the NHS, and if you have to set up a new service, because it's unclear kind of which doctors would be the two doctors that authorise the right to someone to end their life, but it sounds as if there's a whole new bit of the NHS that's going to have to be created in order to do that. And it's going to cost money, which is going to mean that other priorities are going to have to be downgraded. Now, that's a fact of life, but it's also a pretty big argument being put up in lights by a health secretary that dislikes this, and whose deputy, who was sitting before you a few minutes ago, does not, and was really trying to downplay that element of it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You really see ministers just not being used to taking different positions in the same department in health, if not, less. I guess that is the nature of a free vote. Yeah, and talking to other people today, it sounds as if the presumption had been that this goes through. I'm just picking up from people in Labour and elsewhere. They're not so sure now. Yeah, I'll be honest, it's definitely the implication that I'm getting as well. It does feel it's unpredictable, it's difficult to call, but perhaps a lot of questions being asked as well. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Well, the newly announced reforms to the NHS and also that upcoming vote on assisted dying is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the broadcaster and commentator McAndrew and the former Conservative Special Advisor Sam Shah. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Labour Party Senior Advisor Tom Baldwin and the broadcaster and journalist Daisy McAndrew. Great to have you both here. We should just talk about assisted dying first, I think. It does feel like it's a difficult one, isn't it? People wrestling with their beliefs, their experiences, and now the cost factor as well being thrown into the debate.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what Sam was saying, because, of course, Wes Streeting is on slightly thin ice on this issue, because there are pretty strict rules about what ministers should be saying during the debate on a free vote. They're not sort of meant to be pushing, obviously, a government line or a personal line. It's all meant to be personal. And he is slightly muddying the waters between whether this is his personal opinion or his opinion as Health Secretary. So I think that's difficult. And fundamentally, we know that one of the reasons this issue comes up and up is because the public are behind it. The public, when they've been polled, have always consistently been about 65% in favour. But of course, it's not just as easy as saying, yes, I think people should be able to choose, how and when to die. It's much more complicated, which is when Parliament comes in and when they really get down to the nuts and bolts, they often shy away from it because it's so complicated.
I'd sort of give Wes Streeting a bit of a pass on this, because probably more than anyone else in government, I don't think he can take an entirely personal view of this. He's got, in government's words, an NHS on the floor at the moment. He's trying to get it off the floor. He's trying to introduce reforms, as we've heard a bit about today. And I think part of his reasoning is, when you are trying to do that, when you're trying to do something as big as that, do you want to add on top of that a major change in the law about how we treat people at the end of their life? It just seems to me that he's got enough on his plate already. I think it's fair for him to point that out.
I completely take your point that he will feel, goodness me, I'm trying to sort the NHS out. This is the last thing I need. However, in the past, he said the reason he was going to vote against it was on the principle of the issue and was on the fact that he didn't think palliative care, end-of-life care was good enough to cope and so on at the moment. But now he's saying, and another thing, it's going to cost the NHS money, that's the bit that seems like it's muddying the water.
I think
when the Health Secretary says that.
I think in principle he's in favour of it. He voted for it before. I think that the two things you mentioned, which are the cost of palliative care and also just whether this is the right time to do it when the NHS is going through such terrible time anyway, I think those are both pragmatic judgments.
Can I ask, as someone who supports the idea of assisted dying, do you think that they've tried to do this too early in the Parliament? Because I'll be honest, I'm talking to quite a few MPs who are a bit on the fence and starting to pull away, maybe feeling it's a bit rushed, a bit worried. What do you think?
I mean, it does. I'm in favour of it, and other things being equal, if I was an MP, I'd vote for it. But I can also sympathise with a lot of the new MPs. You've got hundreds of new MPs in there, and do you really want to make this choice now when you're not quite clear where it is going, when you're not quite clear whether there's going to be a terrible controversy 2-3 years down the line, when your priority probably for your constituents, particularly if you're a Labour MP, is to show that Labour is delivering on the NHS. And I think that's probably that sort of focus maybe begin to change a few minds.
I feel like the scheduling of this has been bad. If you're in favour, it has been bad. And there were interesting questions at Prime Minister's Questions today with people saying, I might vote for it, but then we haven't got enough time to debate it. And so that's going to make me vote against it because it's going to make me nervous that I haven't really got my head around it or heard all the arguments. And I think that's fine. And I totally agree with Tom. It's quite unfair on these new MPs who've got an awful lot to learn at the moment without them feeling like they're really an expert in this issue, expert enough to vote on it.
Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things where if you're a little bit unsure, then you'll go with the status quo because it's such a big question.
Yeah.
It's not a balance of probabilities. I think this is one where it has to be beyond reasonable doubt in sort of legal terms. And at the moment, I think those doubts are beginning to grow up again. Maybe the debate will move on, but at the moment, right now, it feels those doubts are getting louder.
In the past, it's very often been the House of Lords that's really been very anti this, and particularly some of the bishops and so on. And this time round, it feels like there's a lot of nervousness in the House of Commons as well.
A quick thought, Tom, as well. Was I being a bit unfair, do you think, saying that the reforms announced so far don't quite match the rhetoric of what Labour's promised on the NHS?
I don't think it's unfair, but I think it's a process. You are going to see some really big reforms. What you're seeing at the moment, I think, is sort of a kind of 1990s Impression Act, like league tables, that sort of thing, targets. What I know is coming down the track is lots of stuff about trying to create a healthier nation, preventative care, and also the use of new technology. That's 21st century, and that's possibly a magic bullet. I mean, you can overdo it, but there's a lot of work going on that.
And also, we've discussed this before. There were a lot of things that the Blair government did quickly that got a lot of headlines that were actually pretty cheap. And this is one of those.
It's very cheap.
Getting people to print a list doesn't cost a lot of money, but does get some headlines. And it feels to me like this is a bit of a cheap win.
Yeah, but look, there's nothing the Labour Party is prouder of than its record on the NHS. The last Labour government, had record approval for the NHS when it left office, and the NHS has gone through a 14-year accident, and it'll take quite a long time to get that patient back on its feet.
Okay. Thank you both very much indeed. Lots more from both of you throughout the programme. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, the outgoing President Joe Biden hosts Donald Trump at the White House ahead of the latter's return to high office. We'll have the latest from Washington next.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the Parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Connor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Connor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record. Worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you've failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news. It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News. The full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Well, let's go to the States now, where in the Oval Office, in front of that lovely-looking roaring fireplace, the transition of power in America has entered the first stages. Donald Trump was invited to the White House by the outgoing president, Joe Biden. It's all part of the transition process. Both men committed to a smooth transfer of power, which, of course, didn't quite happen 4 years ago. It's the first time the pair have met since their debate in late June. That, of course, was just before Joe Biden had stepped down from the campaign. See the gathered media there.
Former President,
thank you.
Donald, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And looking forward to having like we said, smooth transition. Do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated, what you need. And we're going to get a chance to talk about some of that today. So
good.
Welcome
thank you
back.
very much. And thank you very much. And politics is tough, and it's many cases not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome.
Well, I can tell you that NBC have just called the House for the Republicans. Let's go straight to our US correspondent, Mark Stone in Washington. Mark, what can you tell us?
Yes, that is the breaking news in the last few minutes. The unfinished business of the election a week ago was which way would the lower house of Congress, the House of Representatives, go? Would the Democrats manage to hold it, or would it go to the Republicans? And the answer is the Republicans have won that lower house. Two houses in Congress, remember, the upper house is the Senate, the lower house is the House of Representatives. All 435 seats of the House of Representatives were up for grabs at the election last week. Of course, it takes time to count the results, but the NBC News decision desk has in the last few minutes called it for the Republicans, which means, as expected, a clean sweep, an extraordinary comeback for Donald Trump, an extraordinary comeback for the Republican Party. They have control of the three powers here in Washington and across the country, the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. So with that, Donald Trump has a huge amount of power, and he intends to use it. He has made that clear through the campaign trail, and indeed has made it clear over the course of the past week as he's been putting together his cabinet down in Mar-a-Lago. But today was the day that we were waiting for, that moment, that Oval Office moment. What would it look like? Two men with such starkly different visions, two men who have thrown such brutal allegations and accusations and names at each other over the course of really many years now. Well, of course, it was democracy that ruled, that Donald Trump has been returned to the White House. And so it was democracy which played out here, a peaceful transfer of power. And you saw that handshake, a hand held out by President Biden, outgoing to President Trump incoming. And President Trump thanked President Biden for a calm transition, I think is what the phrase he used. You're welcome, said President Biden. I wonder if there was a barbed insinuation there, because, of course, 4 years ago, then outgoing President Trump did not afford this moment, this transfer of power, to incoming President Biden.
Thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there in Washington for us. Right, let's chat again to Tom and Daisy, shall we? Have these very cosy photos. I bet they're feeling anything but towards each other.
Although, I mean, and I know this is going to be ageist and all the rest of it, but those cosy photos do just look like two old granddads, don't they? I mean, it is extraordinary that this is an outgoing president and an incoming president when you look at that. And, Biden, I thought, looked particularly frail, even for him. But yet it's funny, a lot of people were so nervous just before the election about what this period would be like if it was a slim Harris victory. Was it going to end with riots on the streets and so on? And of course it's been anything but that with the breaking news that now the lower house has gone Republican as well. And it is extraordinarily calm compared to what we all thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that is true, which I guess is a relief. How do you think Keir Starmer's going to be preparing, reacting?
I was talking to someone quite senior in the government about this the other day, and they said, he's evidence first, not America first. And what we saw over the weekend was Badenoch leaping in, really quite rashly, I think, to say, there's a oven-ready, that phrase again, oven-ready trade deals just sitting there to be done. We've got to grab it. The only reason you wouldn't grab it because you're Euro-obsessed. That's not the way to deal with this. These are incredibly difficult questions. I mean, this is a massive fork in the road for Britain, potentially, about whether we stay aligned with, Europe, whether, and all that entails, or whether we seek to undercut Europe, take a trade deal which might mean chlorinated chicken, which will wipe out our livestock industry. The farmers that are complaining about inheritance tax, they ain't seen nothing if that happens. So I just think this is not one to posture on. This is one where you really want a calm, grown-up Prime Minister looking at the detail, weighing the evidence and taking the right decision in the national interest. And I don't think that will be clear for a while.
No, I'm sure it won't be, but it's fairly obvious that Keir Starmer's job would have been a lot easier if it had been a Harris victory, not just on the personality front and the fact that they're from similar wings of the political spectrum, but we know that Trump and particularly Elon Musk have real problems with the Labour Party. And I know that Badenoch talked about it at the PMQs last week, and she was putting the boot in about David Lammy and perhaps inappropriate old tweets. But there is a difficulty there. It's ridiculous to deny that relationship is going to be pretty sticky for a bit.
Yeah, it's a huge moment, and it will take a huge amount of skill to navigate it. I do have confidence, more confidence than that Keir Starmer were able to do it than Badenoch, who's picked a side even before the ink is dried on those ballot papers.
But at least she would have a lot more in common with Donald Trump. That's what I'm saying. And
in terms of recklessness, yes. Yeah, in terms of recklessness and shooting from the hip, yes. I don't
and
think
not
that,
having slagged him off in the past.
Look, I'm not sure whether that's the most important dynamic in all this. This is going to be an incredibly difficult negotiation. It's a very, very important relationship. So is our relationship with Europe. So is our relationship with our people around the world. And I do not think being reckless, rash, seeking a quick headline is the right way to do it.
I was interested, you mentioned there Elon Musk when you were talking before, and I do find this quite fascinating. Elon Musk, who everyone was thinking, why on earth has he bought Twitter? What a weird move. It's like, oh, okay, this is, it all makes complete sense now. He's got a role in government. How kind of influential do you think that's?
He's got a role in government. His personal wealth has gone up by billions as a result. I mean, you can't even get your head around that sort of quick buck, from backing this horse. I mean, I think we know he's a massive disruptor. We know that he's going to enjoy being very, very involved, and he is unpredictable. I mean, that goes without saying. I mean, I found the family photo of the Trump family with just Musk being the only non-Trump in that photo was really weird. I mean, can you imagine a few years ago, I mean, pre-Trump, saying, the guy of The Apprentice and Elon Musk are one day going to be in the White House? These two extraordinary cartoonish characters.
Yeah, there's so much you just couldn't make.
No, you really couldn't.
From the last few years. And thanks both very much. Coming up next on Politics Hub. Well, it's been 2 weeks since Rachel Reeves delivered her first budget, and there are some concerns from business about the Chancellor's hikes to national insurance. I'll get the thoughts of the head of a nursery group on the impact it's going to have on them. Hello, welcome back. Well, today we had the second round of Keir versus Keir at Prime Minister's Questions. How did they get on? We can talk now to our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who is watching along, listening along. How was it?
She hasn't really hit the target yet, I don't think. This was number 2, as you say. Now, what my observation of today, my first observation is she was all over the place. She had 6 questions right, Leader of the Opposition. Number 1 was COP and council tax. Number 2 was social care. Number 3 was national insurance. Number 4 was back to council tax. Number 5 was national insurance. And number 6 was a 4-day week. And the other observation, of course, is that I counted 5 Labour MPs who bombarded her with quotes about maternity pay and so on, and minimum wage and so on. The sheer might of all those Labour MPs behind Sir Keir Starmer makes it easier for him and harder for her. This is a flavour of the exchange between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, the bit, I think, where she talked about national insurance.
The House would have heard that the Prime Minister could neither confirm nor deny whether there was a cap in council tax was being raised. So I will ask him this question. How much extra does he expect local authorities will have to raise to cover the social care funding gap created by the Chancellor's budget and increases in employers' NI? He told the member for Edinburgh West just now that he was covering social care. How much extra does he expect local authorities to raise?
It's all very well, this knockabout, but not actually listening to what I said 3 minutes ago. There's a bit of a fundamental failure of the Leader of the Opposition. I just said £600 million. I repeat it, £600 million.
That he has repeated that number because he has probably not listened to the Labour-run LGA, who said that with no separate funding for the Chancellor's budget announcements, care providers will likely see increased costs, which will cost councils more, and all of the £600 in grant increase he is giving will not cover what is required for adult social care. It is clear that they had not thought through the impact of the budget, and this is the problem with having a copy-and-paste Chancellor. Did they not realise that care homes, GP surgeries, children's nurseries, hospices, and even charities have to pay employers' NI?
It's interesting, John, you're kind of talking about the kind of wall of Labour MPs and new Labour MPs. It does feel like such a different Parliament. And, of course, we've got some very prominent new members as well, like Nigel Farage.
Well, I thought today was Nigel Farage's best day since he got elected in July, because he had a lively exchange with the Prime Minister at PMQs, and then he was pretty good. He had an urgent question immediately after Prime Minister's questions, taunting the government over the possibility of a Trump veto of that deal on the Chagos Islands. Now, the exchange with Sir Keir Starmer was all quite good-natured. I'll let you listen to it in a moment. But it's the serious point was where he talked about Iran and prescribing their terror organisation. But this was, I think I'm right in saying, Mr Farage's first question to Sir Keir Starmer at PMQs, and it was quite a lively little exchange.
I'm sure the Prime Minister and the whole House would wish to congratulate Donald Trump on his landslide victory last week.
Well, I'm glad to see the honourable member making a rare appearance back here in Britain. He spent so much time in America recently. I was half expecting to see him on the immigration statistics when we see the next batch. But he may have missed. I did congratulate the incoming president last week.
Well, that was quite witty for the Prime Minister, wasn't it? Has he got a new gag writer? But normally he's not a great joker at PMQs. But anyway, you noticed that Nigel Farage seemed to take it in pretty good spirit there.
That's a new quest. Who is writing the PM's jokes? Maybe Tom Baldwin can tell us later on in the programme.
Perhaps it's Tom.
Might be.
There's a better joke than that. Far too funny for me.
Far too funny for him, he says. Thank you very much, John Craig. It's been 2 weeks since Rachel Reeves delivered her first budget, and businesses have been warning about the challenge of absorbing the increases to employers' national insurance and the national living wage rise as well that was announced. Well, we can talk now to the Chief Executive and founder of Acorn Early Years Foundation, Zoe Raven. It's great to have you on the programme. Can you just talk us through the impact that the budget is going to have on nurseries? Because many people will say, I thought nurseries were getting lots more money, so what is everyone grumbling about?
I wish. Well, our financial year is the calendar year, so we were in the process of planning our budget for next year. We'd drafted our budget, we'd taken into account the impact of the living wage increase, which was larger than we expected, particularly for the younger age groups. But we re-budgeted, worked that one out, that was fine. And then we heard rumours of the 1% or 2% increase in national insurance. So we drafted scenarios to cope with that, listened to the budget, and 2% would have cost us an extra 90,000. We were worried about that. So when they announced it was an extra 1.2%, I thought, oh, OK, good, we've planned for that. Then the killer, the bit that nobody expected, was the drop in the threshold, which is £615 per employee. Now, like other nurseries and social care sector, the childcare and early years sector is very heavily dependent on staffing. It's our biggest overhead by an absolute mile. 70% of our overheads are salaries. So to suddenly have this additional factor, it's blown £250,000 hole in my budget for next year. So we're now at the point where we think, well, the first 3 months are okay because this doesn't hit till April. We have no idea how we're going to find that additional £276,000 to fill the hole in our budget. We also know that families cannot afford any more increases in fees. We'd had to budget an increase from April because of the salary increases, but with this additional national insurance, I don't know where they think we're going to find the money. We're a not-for-profit entity. We're a charitable social enterprise. So we don't mind about we're not interested in making large amounts of money. What we are interested in is being financially sustainable. And the worst bit, sorry to rabbit on, but the worst
I'm going to have to come in a minute, though, just to warn you.
Most likely to be affected are those in the areas of deprivation with low-income families who can least afford fee increases. We know that the funding is not going to increase by 10%, which is what it would need to do. And those nurseries and preschools that are heavily dependent on the 3 and 4-year-old funding are going to be the worst affected because that's where the funding rates are going up.
Just to come in, because look, I'll be honest, as a woman who's 40, I feel like kind of nurseries are almost my mastermind subject. And but it does really feel like so many nurseries are on the brink. You see nurseries struggling to stay open, and parents, of course, are trying to scratch their heads because it feels like it's very expensive as well. Do you think that this is going to drive some nurseries to close?
100%. Definitely will. Definitely will. I mean, we're very fortunate.
Are you having conversations with government? Because I guess this is the other thing that I'm trying to get my head around, because the government have been very clear that early years they see as a priority, and yet it does feel that some of the actions since they came into power is not necessarily prioritising the early years sector.
I'm massively disappointed because when we last had a Labour government, we had a workforce development strategy, we had graduate leader funding, it was great. This time around, all they seem to be focused on is breakfast clubs, which don't help us at all, and putting nurseries in empty classrooms, which is a total nonsense for all sorts of reasons that I can explain. But certainly babies and toddlers do not belong in schools. Schools don't actually want babies and toddlers. They might hoover up our 3 and 4-year-olds, but they're not interested in high quality early childcare provision for babies and toddlers who are very expensive to look after, but they need the right environment and they need qualified professional staff. And we need to be able to pay those early years professionals a differential from the minimum wage. We can't pay qualified graduates in many cases the minimum wage. So we've got to build in those salary increases.
OK, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to talk to you today. So thanks for coming on the programme.
Thank you.
Right, let's chat to Tom and Daisy, shall we? I mean, look, there are other areas, obviously, hospices, care homes, but it does feel like nurseries are on the sharp end of some of these budget moves, Tom.
Yeah, we don't know the precise funding settlement yet, so a little bit of this is previous. But what you said there was absolutely right. Last time there was Labour government, there was money for everything, and it's because there was more money around. And we are in incredibly straitened circumstances. You saw in that budget, Rachel Reeves trying to squeeze a bit of cash here, trying to squeeze a bit of cash there, in order to pay for the things which are absolutely essential, getting the NHS off the floor.
But childcare is quite essential as well, isn't it?
Well, it's a big priority.
And for our economy as well. Growth, for example, it's tied up with it.
I agree, but people can't have things every which way. There's a limit to what the government can pay for at the moment. And talking about PMQs, I thought there's actually quite a significant moment there. When Kemi Badenoch was saying, we don't like this, we don't like that, and Keir Starmer said, do you support the nice stuff we're doing, the NHS money, the minimum wage? Do you support that? She said, of course we support that. Well, where's the money coming from? Because you have to make some choices. You have to make some choices.
Trick,
well, it's not. It's just a reality.
Are you anti the NHS? And then, of course, the opponent has to say, of course I'm not. And then, so how are you going to pay for it? But it is about priorities. And childcare has been a priority of this government for this would-be government as it was for a long time. But now childcare is going to be damaged, and it feels like it's unintended consequences. It does feel like it was badly thought through.
I don't think it's quite a parliamentary. I think it's slightly more significant there. What Badenoch did today was essentially say there's a magic money tree. It's basically say we want all the nice stuff, but we don't want to pay for it. That's a really bad place for the Tory opposition to be. Now, I do agree there's some really, really difficult choices. Some choices I don't like. There'll be choices which, there'll be things that everyone doesn't like about this budget and the funding settlements coming. But we just have to recognise that there isn't money to pay for everything. And I think that, when you at that point,
you can argue where you put it. Then I was a choice. And now, it feels like one of those budgets where it all starts to unravel and you get people, like that very good guest, explaining in words of one syllable how this is going to impact and how the minimum wage is going to impact, because she's quite right. You put the minimum wage up that significantly and everyone else has to go up. If you've got that sort of, if you want to reward your more experienced staff, it has huge knock-on impact.
In an ideal world, we'd have zero taxation and perfect public services. We don't live in that world.
Damn it.
I think they did a pretty good job at a budget in really difficult circumstances, finding some more money for the NHS, and people would be screaming blue murder if they hadn't.
I guess, do you think on childcare specifically, and I think Daisy's right, and you're right, it is about priorities clearly.
Yeah.
But I genuinely thought early years was going to be a priority.
Yes.
When you look at what they were saying in the manifesto,
we were told it was.
And what the Education Secretary said in particular. That's, I guess, what I find slightly confusing.
Yeah, I think Bridget Phillipson's lost a few battles. I think she wanted to do a lot of stuff about childcare as well. And she was told a year or two ago that we're not going to have the money for that. Look, we don't know what spending review is going to come up with. So I think it's a little bit hard to sort of condemn them before we've seen the colour of the money.
But as Rachel Reeves kept saying, this is, she's not going to do constant tweaking. This was the big bang budget.
Yeah, but we haven't had the spending review.
No, I get that. But this was where the priorities were laid out. And the big ideas. And the NHS funding is also really interesting because, yes, they have front-loaded a huge amount of spending into the NHS in the first 2 years, which is quite unusual in the life of a parliament. And a lot of people are saying, that's great, but what are they going to spend it on? Because it's sort of like saying, I've got a leaky roof, I'm going to go and get a mortgage, I've got the money now, and I'm going to start fixing it immediately without getting the surveyor in to say exactly how you should spend the money and exactly how you should fix it. And a lot of people are saying Wes Streeting could end up spending too much money too soon, which of course slightly goes against the grain from all of us saying the NHS needs more money, but he could do it too quickly and he could make expensive mistakes.
That's why the reform agenda is so important. That's why, when they published their 10-year plan for the NHS, that is going to be a big thing. Wes Streeting was saying today that they're not getting enough bang for their buck at the moment at the NHS.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. We've been talking about a lot of serious topics on the Politics Hub today, so I'm very pleased to say that still to come on the Politics Hub. Next up, we're celebrating cat people. I promise there is a political element to the story as well, but we are bringing you the contest over who is Parliament's top cat.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
Enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster's just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
We're seeing an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there.
This is much more like a normal town.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
We've been crushed. Free from wherever you get your news.
We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, I think you'll probably agree there's been a lot of depressing, serious news recently, so you're going to forgive me for fully indulging myself at the end of the programme because I've been looking forward to the story all day. But cats belonging to MPs and peers are battling it out to become Battersea Cats and Dog Homes per Minster. They've even got their own manifesto trying to explain to voters exactly why they should win. So we couldn't resist. We are going to bring you some of the runners and riders. Right, here we go. This is the first cat who is in the contest. You can see some of the very, very gorgeous cats that are in the contest. These are all members of Parliament. It's cats. Stella Creasy's got 7-month-old kittens, Chili and Bandit in it. Janet Davies, Cookie. Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. His cat Atlee is even in it too. Mimi, the snow Bengal. I mean, they are some really beautiful creatures there. There we go. I love some of the ideas behind this. They are just...
It's very, very sweet. I have to say, it reminds me of my first ever journalistic assignment was going out to the Green outside the Commons to cover the first ever Parliamentary Dog of the Year competition, which in those days was sponsored by a dog food brand called Woofit Mix, and so it was called the Woofit Mix Dog of the Year competition. And all these MPs were so excited. There I was a very, very junior reporter.
Well, that was your first job. Yeah, it's been downhill ever since.
It has, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So they were the best parliamentarians
that is great.
I covered.
That is great. I mean, this is all basically just a big excuse to show my cat because I think that we can probably show. That is not my cat.
That is my dog. That is Margie. That's not my dog. That's your dog. Sorry, they're quite similar. That's my dog, Margie. Yeah.
Right.
My dog's nicer than your dog.
I should say, in the interest of balance, we are going for
your cat.
Right. That's the cat. That's Ned. who is a Battersea cat.
I'm struggling to work out which end is which on Ned. That's
I know.
very, very
this
cute.
is basically Ned in his like kind of perfect relaxed pose. I basically want to be Ned. He just lolls around like this all day. It's a great life. But let's go back to the dogs, because on Politics Hub we are all about balance. We don't want it all to be about cats, obviously.
So that is Sparky.
That's your dog.
That's my dog.
I mean, what a beautiful dog.
He's always mistaken for a cockapoo, but he's not a cockapoo. He's a Tibetan Terrier. But I mean, he does get called a cockapoo a lot. And named after the footballer
handsome.
Mark Hughes. So that's why he's
Sparky,
called, he's called Sparky.
And Tom, your dog as well, I think we can see. They are quite similar.
That's Margie. Yeah. Now, Neil Kinnock met Margie and informed me that he thought all dogs were Tories.
He thought all dogs were Tories?
He's always thought dogs were Tories because of sort of family values, belief in sort of home defences, you know. I'm not sure whether Margie has very strong political beliefs.
And actually, I can tell you that Michael Foot had a Tibetan Terrier, same breed as mine, who lived to 18 and who was called Dizzy after Disraeli.
Amazing.
So I'm hoping